I could feel the cool air seeping through the cracks of my bedroom window as I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of my chaotic day, and the unsettling feeling that something was off wouldn't leave me alone. Then, just as I turned over to try and shut my mind off, I heard it, a faint knock on my door. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again, louder this time, echoing through the quiet night. I hesitated, my heart racing. Who would be knocking at this hour? I threw on my robe and crept toward the door, each step amplifying the thudding in my chest. Peering through the peephole, I was startled to see Mr. Alden, my 65-year-old neighbor. His face was partially obscured by the dim porch light, but there was an urgency in his expression that made my stomach twist. I opened the door a crack. "Mr. Alden, is everything okay?" He nodded quickly, his gray eyes piercing in the faint light. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I need to talk to you. It's important." I hesitated, unsure of what to make of his request. Mr. Alden was always polite, the kind of neighbor who waved from his porch or helped carry groceries. But there was something in his tone tonight that I'd never heard before, something almost desperate. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. As he crossed the threshold, I couldn't help but notice the faint smell of aftershave and something else, something earthy and raw that lingered in the air. He sat down on my couch, his hands clasped tightly together, and for a moment he didn't speak. I watched him carefully, my curiosity battling with an underlying sense of unease. "I'm sorry to intrude," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. "But there's something I need to get off my chest, something I can't keep to myself anymore." I swallowed hard, unsure of what to expect. "What is it?" He looked up at me, his gaze unwavering. "I've been watching you." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. "Watching me?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, as though sensing my discomfort. "But I've seen the way he treats you, your husband, the way he dismisses you, the way he neglects you." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't realized anyone had noticed. I hadn't even admitted it to myself, not fully. "I know it's not my place," he continued, his voice softening. But I couldn't stand by and say nothing. "You deserve so much more than that." I sat down across from him, my mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this now?" He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them tighter. "Because I care about you, more than I should." The air between us grew thick with unspoken tension. I didn't know what to say, how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to pretend this conversation had never happened. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of being seen, of being wanted. "Mr. Alden," I began, but he cut me off. "Call me James," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of where this was going but unable to stop it. "James," I said slowly. "I don't think." Before I could finish, he reached out and placed his hand over mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to know that someone sees you, that someone values you." His words hit me like a tidal wave, breaking down walls I didn't even know I'd built. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. "James, I trailed off, my voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." He smiled gently, his eyes softening. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of his confession settling over us. I didn't know what to feel, what to think. All I knew was that something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone. The rest of the night passed in a blur of whispered words and shared secrets. By the time he left, the first rays of dawn were peeking through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. As I watched him walk away, I couldn't help but wonder what this meant for us, for my marriage, for everything. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't see James for days after that night. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me couldn't stop thinking about him, his words, his touch, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. One evening, as I was tending to my garden, I saw him standing by the fence that separated our yards. He didn't say anything, just watched me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. Finally, he spoke. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, glancing around as though someone might be watching. "James, I don't think that's a good idea." "Please," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. Just for a moment. Against my better judgment, I walked over to the fence. He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, and I felt that same spark I felt that night. It scared me how much I wanted to feel it again. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "I know this is wrong, but I can't help it." I looked away, my heart pounding. "James, I'm married." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But are you happy?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Was I happy? The truth was I didn't know. I hadn't allowed myself to think about it for so long that the question felt foreign, almost absurd. Before I could answer, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You deserve to be happy." His words stayed with me long after he walked away. That night I lay awake in bed, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. I knew I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could destroy everything I built. But I also knew that I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel, alive, desired, seen. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself drawn to him in ways I couldn't explain. We began stealing moments together, brief conversations by the fence, lingering glances across the yard, stolen touches that left me breathless. It was a dance we couldn't stop, even though we both knew the stakes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he invited me over for dinner. I hesitated, my mind racing with all the reasons why I should say no. But in the end, I couldn't resist. His house was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of roasted garlic and herbs. We sat at his kitchen table, the candlelight casting flickering shadows on the walls. For the first time in years, I felt at ease, like I could be myself without fear of judgment. After dinner, as we stood by the window watching the stars, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that took my breath away. "I know this is complicated," he said softly, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this way about you." I looked at him, my heart aching with a mix of longing and guilt. "James, this can't happen." "I know," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I had to tell you. I had to let you know how I feel." Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was as tender as it was electrifying. For a moment, I let myself get lost in it, in him. But then reality came crashing back, and I pulled away, tears streaming down my face. "I can't do this," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry." He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding and sadness. "I'll respect whatever you decide," he said, "but I'll always be here for you, no matter what." As I walked back to my house that night, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I knew I had a choice to make, a choice that would change everything. But as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't deny the truth. James had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I avoided James, throwing myself into work and chores, trying to drown out the thoughts and feelings that consumed me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape them. I couldn't escape him. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch, lost in thought, he appeared at the edge of my yard. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with an intensity that made my heart ache. Finally, I spoke. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way." He crossed the yard in a few quick strides, stopping just inches from me. "Then don't," he said softly. "Life is too short to live with regrets." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the storm that raged inside me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity, of peace. I knew what I had to do. As we stood there under the stars, I made a decision that would change everything. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain. But in that moment, I chose to follow my heart, wherever it might lead.